In the art of photography, it's not about what you're seeing, it's how you're seeing it. Anyone can point a camera at something pretty, but photography is about capturing and framing a moment in a way that brings out its beauty. This philosophy extends to video games as well. It's not enough to just make beautiful looking textures and artwork. Thought needs to go into where, when, and how the player is seeing that artwork. Some games opt for fixed camera angles, and developers who truly take advantage of it gain a massive edge over other games when it comes to getting the player to see something in the way that they want them to see it. It is super sad that turn-based combat systems have become synonymous with low budget because they have so much potential in this area. The ability to direct a camera in a battle scene is invaluable, a luxury that most real-time systems don't have. Perspective is powerful, especially when it's used to convey some sort of feeling. There are lots of other areas where a developer can really take advantage of camera control, like in cutscenes. No, I'm not talking about the meticulously crafted ones found in action-adventure games. I'm thinking more along the lines of characters standing around with text boxes in a JRPG. When it comes to a 60+ hour RPG with a ridiculous amount of dialogue, there's just no chance a developer is going to be able to tell that story entirely through high-budget animation. So a lot of it is designated to lower-budget sequences such as this. However, just because it's lower budget doesn't mean it can't be done in an interesting way, which is why some end up being more visually appealing than others. The Persona series is really good at this. Even before the incredibly stylish Persona 5, the series was known for having good art direction, and I think a lot of that has to do with focus. The games have never been that impressive on a technical level, but they strike this really nice balance between visual novel and video game by using 2D artwork to capture character expression off to the side of the screen. By doing this, it allows them to pull back the camera during cutscenes to focus more on framing their surroundings, which gives the games this really nice sense of place. And they're still able to get that intimate feel with the characters, which is something that Persona 5 does especially well. Anytime a character says something with a little more passion behind it, their face cuts through the screen, making them the center of attention. Anytime you have to decide on what to say, your character shifts in the frame. Again, it's all just really good focus. Persona is always making good use of screen space and showing you what's important. Hey Hug, not every game's a slow-paced JRPG. You're right, but there is one area where almost every game in existence has the chance to really frame something. The title screen. Millions of people have looked up the title screen for Ocarina of Time in order to reminisce about the game and gush about how the little opening sequence makes them feel. So it blew my mind when Nintendo just threw a slideshow at the beginning of Breath of the Wild and went, yep, this is good. Send her out, boys. I am always super annoyed when I see a bad or mediocre title screen because it's this one opportunity for the developer to show something that the player is guaranteed to see every time they start the game. It's the perfect time to set the tone or to capture a theme. I'm gonna bring up Atlas again because they've been really good with aesthetics for a while, and nowadays they pretty much nail the title screen every time for all of their big games. So, title screens are a gimme. They're big, the player is always going to see them, and they're going to see them often. Putting important imagery in there is a no-brainer, but not everything has the luxury of being in a title screen. If you put some good-looking art elsewhere in a game, you better make sure it's being seen. A lot of games hand camera control over to the player, so it's kinda hard to frame anything during actual gameplay. That being said, there are still things developers can do in order to manipulate how the player is viewing the world around them. Great example, Breath of the Wild. When you spend all this time crafting such a big and beautiful open world, you want to make sure the player is experiencing that world from an optimal viewpoint. In games like this, that typically means elevation. You don't want the player's camera jammed up to walls and tight spaces the whole time. You want them to get those beautiful open air views from high up, so they can really appreciate the scope of the world. To accomplish this, Breath of the Wild takes some inspiration from Western open world games. A feature that's gotten a lot of hate is the infamous Ubisoft Tower, but I think if done correctly, it's a good way to give the player a vantage point by designing an objective that puts you up there anyway. However, Breath of the Wild doesn't just use towers to elevate the player, it uses its climbing mechanics and the paraglider. As you may or may not know, you can climb virtually anything in the game. Already, this creates more opportunities for the player to find themselves on mountaintops. That being said, the climbing mechanics are nothing without its other half, the paraglider. The paraglider is, by far, the best mode of transportation in the game. It allows you to fly right over large chunks of land and lets you move directly towards an objective without having to adjust your path according to the terrain. The paraglider's effectiveness is measured directly by the height of your launching point. As a result, the player is always being incentivized to climb, even without an objective. The paraglider is a reward in and of itself, and is a very natural way of getting the player into positions where they can view their surroundings. Now, the last thing I want to talk about has to do with pacing. Have you ever watched someone play a game and it just seems like you see certain things long before the player ever does? That's because watching and playing are two very different experiences. When you're watching someone play, your eyes have all the time in the world to drift across the screen. When you're playing, your eyes are always focusing on the most important information, especially when it comes to games that are difficult or demand a lot of the player's attention. For example, in a hard action game, enemy attack triggers and animations take precedence over whatever the hell is happening in the background. Over time, you will start to zone out a lot of everything else. Because of this, I think the most beautiful games know when to pump the brakes and give the player some time to really take in their surroundings. In a game like Shadow of the Colossus battles can be tense, and a lot of your focus is directed towards trying not to fall. But the horseback rides on your way to the Colossi give you time to breathe. Because there are no regular enemies in the game, these moments are very quiet and peaceful, and this is when you really start noticing the environment around you. So, I think I've made some sort of point. Maybe. I hope. I don't know. The only thing I wanted to get across is that pretty games are more than just pretty assets. That's why a janky, low poly world can still be beautiful. Because beauty is all about how it's framed.